region, but also I can see the issue from both sides. I can see very well that in France, as in Germany, as in Austria, as in Netherlands, people don't know anymore why we need Europe. My children that were born in France can't even imagine that Europe could not exist. But it can happen. So on the European side, on the French side, of course what the President Macron is saying, we need to reform Europe, is very crucial for Europe to exist, because our people in Europe don't know anymore why they need Europe. On the other side, not in this, of course not in this room. Here we are, all of us, we are convinced Europeans. But outside, this is more and more the feeling people have. But on the other side, in the Western Balkans, people know very, very well why they need Europe. It is very simple. In these countries, you have a mass of middle-class people growing. Let's call them the progressive forces in these countries who want Europe for the freedom, for the well-being, for the democracy, for all the values of Europe. And you have other forces, everybody knows other forces that are not the majority, they are minority, but they have money and they have power. And these forces don't want Europe, of course, in our countries. They want to keep the power and to keep the money. So this is why Europe should help our countries, the progressive forces in our countries, to go ahead and should support them. And in this regard, the Sofia Declaration, with the clear support on different topics like rule of law and good governance, like security and migration, like socio-economic development and youth, connectivity, digital agenda, which I was very at the beginning of it, and reconciliation. The support that Europe is giving is very important, but on the other side, the political support with the opening of negotiations is as important as the financial support. You need to give this signal to people to say, yes, you are Europeans. And I can understand very well the difficulty of on the other side, because we are in an electoral year, and it, of course, for generally in the opinion, it is difficult to make the distinction between opening negotiations and being a member, of course, for people in Europe. But we can explain that. We can explain that.
And just going back to your point about making the point of being European and the positive aspects towards that, I'd be interested in, what do you think that the EU is doing enough to promote a sort of European identity within the region? Do you think that what the EU is choosing to do within the region is actually helping the process, as opposed to maybe exacerbating the divides?
Well, I mean, just to pick up from what we just heard, I must say that I was very disappointed that President Macron did not take the opportunity to make a strong case for enlargement in the run-up to the Sofia summit and at the summit itself. Instead repeating the old traditional French position of, you know, deepening has to go before widening, which, as we heard before, is really not those are not exclusive or exclusionary processes. They could very well go in parallel. So that was a disappointment for me, and it was especially disappointment because France is one of the problem cases. First, when it comes to opening negotiations with Albania. But secondly, also with regards to public opinion, in the sense that, you know, it looks like the French people might have a say in whoever wants to join the European Union next, and that is not an obvious battle to win. That requires leadership. Now, we've seen very impressive leadership on the part of the prime ministers of Greece and Macedonia. I think we probably all agree on that. That was an inspiration. It was an inspiration to see the political change in Macedonia, which incidentally was really brought about not so much by what the EU was doing as by other players, especially the US, and by the citizens who were going out into the street because they had enough of the previous regime. So on the one hand, that's very inspiring, but it's also a little bit of a reality check about what the EU is doing and can be doing. When Mr. Peterle said that he was going to make a very political remark, I expected you to say something about the EPP, of which you're a senior member, because of course both in Greece and in Macedonia we have EPP affiliates who are now mobilizing against the agreement. I do hope that the leadership of the two prime ministers and the reward that the EU member states are going to give to Macedonia by agreeing to open membership talks next week will sway public opinion. But again, that is not a done deal by any means. And finally, I would like to just mention one thing, which is kind of an obvious point to make, but nobody has really made it that quite in those terms, which is that really across the region, with the exception of Albania and Macedonia, we're seeing very worrying processes of, increasing limits to media freedom, increasing restriction of space for civil society, something that some people call democratic backsliding. So this isn't actually. I look at the region and I'm not so incredibly terribly hopeful that this year really is proving to be a turning point. I finally would like to, and I'll conclude with that, I would like to thank Mr. Weitz for making a few very important points about Bosnia. I think Bosnia is, in many ways, a much harder case even than relations between Kosovo and Serbia. Because Kosovo and Serbia, we kind of know what the end point is. The two sides have to get there. I heard this morning RTS was reporting that the dialogue will resume in Brussels next week. I don't know whether that's true, but that would certainly be a good step. With Bosnia, things are just much less clear-cut. We don't know what the end game could be. There seems to be a recognition that some kind of constitutional reform is needed, but nobody really has any bright idea how to get there without reopening that can of worms. And so I think the EU needs to, both the Commission, the EAS, and the Member States need to think very hard about what to do about Bosnia.
Right, thank you very much. And in regards to the point you made in regards to this point about the lack of talk of enlargement and the lack of, in your words, the lack of, we could say, credible process within the region for the accession process, I'd be interested in what you think of that statement. Do you agree with that statement? Do you agree that more needs to be done within the region, not only just by the EU, as to be vocal, but also just the actual member states themselves needing to sort of take that reality check and move forward with it?
Yes, definitely so. First of all, thank you for the invitation, and this is one of the very rare occasions where the European Parliament has a distinct majority in panels. This compensates for the events that Parliament cannot attend when it has plenary session in Strasbourg. If you would allow me, I would comment. I was also asked to comment on what our MEP said, and I would like to attach a few comments of my own to that. And not only the MEPs, but of course also Ms. Milena, and I very much liked the expression you used, let's not talk the talk, but walk the talk. And I think this is valid also very much for the EU institutions. And if we see this Western Balkan strategy of the Commission, as we call it in short, as a turning point, then the Commission should consider it its Bible, to use this rather Christian expression and also live up to what is said in this document. And I already see some inconsistencies. Let me give 2 examples. First of all, there is the concept of bilateral disputes, and reconciliation is revived, so to say. But why then 2 months later, in the country report of Bosnia-Herzegovina, for instance, there is not a single mention of the word reconciliation? This to me is striking. The Western Balkan strategy also says, I literally, or almost literally quote, that all the countries have elements of state capture. I would like to see that this is bold language, and we all applauded the tougher and bolder language used by the Commission in this document. I would like to see then in the country reports for each individual country a section which says, in the case of Montenegro, Serbia, Kosovo, etc., the elements of state capture identified by the Commission are 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. I mean, this is something I'm missing in that document. And I had the impression when reading the strategy that the Commission was also a bit oblivious of its 2015 enlargement strategy, where there is much more explicit talk about reconciliation, and where there is also a reference to the Vienna Declaration, I mean, referring to the Vienna Summit as part of the Berlin process, on bilateral disputes. Why is this reference not included in the Western Balkan strategy last February? Because it is a very important declaration which was made and nothing was done with it since 2015. All neighboring EU member states were invited to co-sign this declaration. None of them did. I mean, it is high time we held both sides accountable for that situation. Now, like Toby already mentioned it, I mean, thank you, Mr. Weitz, for bringing up this very interesting and completely underexposed issue about the double nationalities and the Bosniaks risking to be left alone, so to say. Mr. Dzhambazki referred to the Friendship Treaty, which indeed I also think was kind of a catalyst also for the entire name dispute issue. I personally would rather not have seen the word used again, and it's almost becoming commonplace when something interesting or a breakthrough happens to call it historic. I mean, I also applaud this agreement, but at the same time I was thinking of all the language used on Cyprus. We also used momentum, historic window of opportunity, now or never, and we see that despite that it collapsed. I mean, when you have a closer look at the agreement, there is a lot of nitty-gritty there that will make implementation very difficult indeed. Mr. RADOS pointed to the situation of media freedom in Montenegro, mentioning in particular the public broadcasting. We had the dismissal of Ms. Kadia a few days ago. So despite warnings from the European Union and despite 3 consecutive mentions in the reports of the Commission that there is no progress on media freedom in Montenegro, things are deteriorating. There was also the attack on, and it was not the first attack, on Mira Lakic, the reporter of VSD, which makes me think, and this is something which is of course not explicitly mentioned in the Western Balkan strategy, that if you want to become a member in 2025, you'd better make sure that you are ready by the end of 2022, because there is a very long ratification process and maybe some cumbersome issues coming up at the last moment, as we saw in the last half year before the accession of Croatia. Now, interestingly, in the case of Montenegro and on freedom of expression, this means that 4.5 years after opening negotiations on chapters 23 and 24, we see where we are on media freedom, and there is exactly the same amount of time to go before we need to have an accession treaty ready to be submitted for ratification. I think that is worrying. We have a similar situation in Serbia. Ms. de Monte raised a very valid point of the property issue, which is also, in my view, underexposed, and it may soon pop up on the agenda of our interparliamentary meetings. I would personally applaud that. Another very tricky issue in Montenegro is the environment chapter. I think the authorities are underestimating that. Mr. PETERLE also referred to the name dispute and the whole historic background. I want to use the opportunity to draw attention to the recent Jean-Monnet dialogue, which was launched with the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, is still there, to say, which means that the European Parliament continues to be very much involved, and it will also be a forum to try and maintain pressure to make the best of this historic, as it was said, agreement. Mr. KUKAN, you mentioned a stable progress, but the pace which is not always okay. This brings me to the Serbian authorities' disappointment for the second time in a row that only 2 chapters will be opened in June, while they say they are ready to open 5. My private and now public advice to the Serbian authorities would be like, listen, maybe this is a soft diplomatic signal that you should do more on chapters 23 and 24, because nobody wants to use this overall balance clause, which is in the negotiating framework, which means that if things do not evolve rapidly enough in chapters 23, 24, the opening of additional chapters may temporarily be blocked. So maybe opening just 2 chapters is like a soft signal, like you want to open 5, maybe you could open 3, 4, or even 5, but you should act more quickly on that. And if you will allow me a very last point, and I might wish to have the view of people in the room on that. Regarding the dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo, I mean, at some point in one of the numerous statements of the External Action Service, it slipped into one of the statements that we are now moving into the next phase towards a final agreement. It is called a legally binding, comprehensive normalization agreement or something like that. I mean, my worry is that if there is no, at the end of the game, if there is no explicit recognition by either side, mutual recognition, I wonder what the 5 non-recognizing member states will say. Like, if I were one of them, I would say, either you mutually recognize, and I want to hear that word, recognize, in my presence, or we might not be happy with the situation and still not recognize Kosovo. So my question would be, could we have a bit more clarity in order not to have a major effort and arrive at a legally binding agreement which then encounters a lot of political stumble blocks? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that, André. So I would like to move on to our last contributor, Corina STRATULAT, if you will.
Right. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to contribute.
Sorry, I'll just interrupt you for a moment. Isabella de Monte needs to move on to another meeting, so thank you very much for attending. And thank you very much.
Right. And for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. I think what I wanted to remark is that the present time at which we find ourselves, I think, is a good reminder or illustration of the fact that despite our tendency to see enlargement primarily in institutional terms, the policy has always been and remains under the firm control of the member state. The EU's internal procedures for handling enlargement, which date back to the accession negotiation of 69-72, are, well, almost exclusively intergovernmental in character. Therefore, despite the Commission President Juncker's visit to the region earlier this year, notwithstanding the tough love that we've heard about from the European Commission's recent or latest strategy for the region, and also despite the European Commission's recent recommendations for the opening of accession negotiations with Albania and Macedonia, the member states preserve the final say on all decisions related to regarding enlargement as an absolute and uncontested prerogative. In other words, while we might have actually read many of this year's gestures coming from Brussels as strong signs of a more consistent re-engagement between the EU and the region, the proof of that, I think, will actually ultimately be found in the national politics of enlargement. And halfway through 2018, where do we stand on that? So far, Bulgaria and Austria did adopt enlargement as a priority for their respective council presidencies, but there was no endorsement of the Commission's strategy for the region by the member states. Then at the Sofia summit, Spain was a no-show on account of Kosovo. The conclusions refer to these countries as partners rather than countries. And the French President Macron chose the worst time possible to state the obvious, namely that EU internal reform and consolidation was necessary. Well, so much then for what we can expect from this June European Council and also from the other high-level summit on the region, which is upcoming in a member state that is on its way out of the Union. Here, however, it is, I think, important to state that the position of the EU on enlargement should not be looked at in monolithic terms. The member states cannot be considered a single bloc any more than the countries of the region can be regarded as one entity. The national politics of enlargement obscures not only a myriad of national policy agendas, but also a multitude of different and quite specific reasons for any member state support or otherwise reservation towards enlargement. And these positions are also not fixed, but they're open to change over time. And the implication of acknowledging this is twofold. First, it renders the binary picture of the European polity as either in favor or against enlargement as neither very accurate nor actually very helpful in understanding reality. In reality, the EU as a whole is committed to the policy and no member state is opposed to enlargement. But while some member states may see a logic to expansion because of strong historic, social, business, economic links with the region, or because enlargement can help them to further their own ambitions and goals in the EU, other member states may worry about crime, about immigration, or about minorities at home above anything else. Individual positions of EU capitals become therefore enormously important for the overall success of the policy, because the attitude that member states eventually embrace can delay or can wreck the process. By departing from agreed conditions and procedures and by allowing the process to fall hostage, for example, to specific disputes or to considerations that have more to do with the vagaries of domestic politics in the member states rather than with the situation on the ground in the Balkans, enlargement can lose steam, can lose credibility and leverage. And we have seen this actually playing out over and over again in the Balkans these past years. This brings me to a second and related implication, which has to do with the fact that the right balance between incentives and conditions becomes ever more difficult to strike when individual member states decide to diverge in functional terms. Strategic security interests can take priority over democratic promotion and call for a rapid integration of the region, but this actually ignores that democracies are the most suitable polities to solve security and state-building problems. Conversely, the quest for the democratic transformation of the Balkan countries demands strict application of conditions so as to prevent a premature accession. But this again undermines the risks of letting countries in limbo on the EU track or dragging the process indefinitely. So far, I think the EU has been struggling to reconcile, the EU member states, that is, have been struggling to reconcile its different priorities in the region, and this has had at least two counterproductive effects. The first one, it has, as Toby has mentioned, facilitated a deterioration of democratic standards throughout the region and has led to the consolidation of strongmen at the helm of different Balkan countries. And second, because time is of the essence, we can go maybe into detail about each of those during the discussion. Second, it has made it easier for other actors, most notably Russia, to meddle in the region and to score points in the overall tug of war with the West. So from this perspective, the present time, I think, with the pending decisions on Albania and Macedonia's membership bids, first and foremost, is not only a reminder of all the risks and weaknesses of the EU's tired enlargement policy towards the Balkans, but also a chance to prove that past lessons have been internalized, that the current enlargement momentum is real, that the EU can strike the right balance between incentives and conditions despite domestic politics and despite the upcoming EP elections, and that it can deal a blow to negative external interferences in the region. It is hard to imagine, I think, how the Balkans will stay on track if the member states fail to rise to the occasion now and reassure the Balkan countries that their recent efforts and their recent political courage have not been in vain. So I think I will stop here, but happy to elaborate on all of these points in the discussion.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. So now for the final portion of the event, I would like to open the floor to everybody in the room. If you have any questions regarding specific points, if you have any statements that you'd like to make and have questions by any chance, then please feel free. So if you'd like, if anybody in the back would like to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll pick you out.
I just want to apologize because I hit the wall.
No, that's absolutely fine. Well, thank you very much for coming.
It was a pleasure, thank you all.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your presence. Thank you. Anybody with any questions?
I have a couple of remarks to the speakers. To you, you said that, okay, interest of increased interest for the enlargement to come back on the top priority or on the agenda of the European Union started much earlier than this strategy which was published in February. I just wanted to say it because toward the end of the last year, many debates in the political groups and in all three parts of the triangle showed that we need to do something because we were losing credibility. EU was losing credibility in the Western Balkans because we asked them to deliver, they did, and we did not deliver ourselves. So it was necessary to do something. Concerning Mr. Fogel, he's one of my most favorite journalists, but I can't fully agree with him that on the resolution of the name issue, America should take more credit than the EU.
I didn't mean the name issue, I meant the change in government.
Ah, okay.
Sorry if I was unclear about that.
It is exactly what you said, because in main issue, I don't think that we need to establish who has more credit, because the most important thing is that it has been resolved, and I hope that it will be finished, because Ambassador Nimitz was traveling there for 15 years, and if it was for him, he was ready to travel another 15 or 20 years. So I think that many dynamics within the European Union help to resolve this issue. I share your disappointment with President Macron and France concerning the enlargement, because what he says, we all agree that EU needs reform, but what kind of reform he means? If the enlargement should wait for the implemented reform of the European Union, my God, so how long are we going to wait? So I don't agree with that at all. And it's strange to me because in all the previous rounds of enlargement, Netherlands played the bad guy. They were the most strict. Now France took over, and I don't know why. And there are still problems with the Council decision. And one remark from today. I hope that enlargement and the accession negotiations for Albania and Macedonia will not become a victim of much bigger issue. Angela Merkel has 14 days to reach the agreement of the migrant issue. 2 weeks for reaching the agreement of that issue. So I wish her well.
Edward, we will send Troika. We will send Troika
to Germany.
So I hope that really it will not be said that now we have more important issues to attend, because I don't think that it is any contradiction between the reform of the EU and the enlargement process. Of course, André, the MUNTER always poses very difficult, complicated questions concerning, I am one of the 5 non-recognized, I'm from Slovakia. What shall we do when they reach the legally binding agreement? I think I would better wait what the agreement is. The important thing is that they are going into that phase. President Vučić organized for the internal dialogue with the people, and I'm following his statements. I think that he's fair. He's fair what he said, that he is ready to engage in this very difficult process. But it shouldn't go that way that international community will put all the requirements to Serbia only. Serbia will be the only side who has to make concessions. That's wrong. If it is an agreement, it has to be compromise agreement. So let's wait what the agreement is, but I can tell you that whatever agreement is, Slovakia is going to recognize Kosovo.
Thank you very
Serious.
much. Thank you very much for that, Mr. KUKAN. So a gentleman just behind you wants to ask a question. Please, could you introduce yourself?
I actually would like to comment a little bit about the influence of internal developments in a neighbor country, actually the biggest country in the region, Turkey,
Yes.
and how this translates into influence over Balkans and thus...
Before you make your comment, could I please ask you to announce your name?
Yeah. My name is Eduard. I'm representing a Brussels-based organization called Platform Peace and Justice.
Thank you.
We basically monitor justice and report justice in Turkey. Well, 2 years ago, Turkey suffered a disastrous coup attempt. Right after the coup attempt, government said that claimed that elected government has been under danger and they declared state of emergency. And unfortunately, they kicked off a huge purge against all opposition groups. But they picked on a particular civic movement and blamed them of being behind the coup attempt, masterminding the coup attempt. They started a brutal witch hunt against their members. So this is the background. On the 17th of October last year, Mr. President, Mr. Erdogan, visited Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, and at that encounter he said that this is a milestone, that visit is a milestone for Balkan-Turkey relations, and there are terrorists and state enemies all across Balkans. Turkey is mighty enough to bring them all back home, and they are very keen on collaborating with local authorities. Interestingly, since then, there have been roughly about 25 encounters between Turkish authorities and Balkan states, minimum being like Minister of Foreign Affairs, Prime Minister, and President level. But in 2008, in the first half of 2018 alone, Mr. Erdogan hosted 8 foreign leaders, 4 of them being from this region. So this, I think, shows Turkey's interest over Balkans. Obviously, they asked a couple of illegal operations across Balkan states, including illegal deportation of opposition figures, including Kurds, leftists, Gülenists, etc., and confiscation of Gülenist institutions, either handing them over or shutting them down. And finally, if these two not possible, they in worst scenarios, they abducted people from Balkan states. You know what happened in Kosovo a couple of months ago. These situations, unfortunately, not only distorting the illegal operations, not only distorting the new democracies, justice mechanism in these countries, but also increasing Turkey's power grab over these small countries. Now, next week, this on 24th of this week already, on Friday, Turkey has historical elections. And Turkish authorities on election rallies proudly announces what they did in Balkan states. They tell about these things, about success stories, but unfortunately these turn to turmoil within these small states. President Erdogan recently went to Bosnia and run a local election rally in the country. So I believe EU should do more, should take more proactive precautions protecting democracies of these young democracies, which are already EU candidate. There are two good examples, Albania, I can say, and Greece, not exactly Western Balkans, but on the other side, bad examples supposed to be Kosovo and Bulgaria, unfortunately. They couldn't stand with their democracy, but require support from European Union, I think. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Alojz,
Thank you. Some remarks to what was said. As far as EPP is concerned, what I said goes also for EPP. All involved have to take into account which could be consequences of adoption or endorsement or of continuation of the same. I remember, I don't like to be historic again, but 27 years we had war in Slovenia, which moved then to Croatia, then to Bosnia, Kosovo, and so on. There was no European common foreign security policy. It happened later in a certain framework, let's say so. To be credible and responsible means to be united as far as strategy for Western Balkans is concerned. We cannot be credible and responsible with very different positions on the same important issues. And a small investment can trigger, political investment can trigger big mess in that region where the conflict potential is definitely still there. And the only good alternative for a solution is European perspective. And of course, many elements were mentioned in that regard. We cannot have strong European perspective for Western Balkans with weak Brussels. It will not function. And this is why it's so important that not only Germany and France speak terms, the so-called engine, but that we are united in that regard, and it's really a priority. And there is no need to explain the consequences if we don't do progress in that regard. And we don't need additional 15 years to have another summit between European presidents and regional actors or prime ministers, let's say so. I do hope that Austria will do a lot in its 6 months, because Austria knows the region very well, and I think that Bulgaria provided an added value. What is important is that we need a continuous progress, and this enlargement, for me, is part of the same historic enlargement, but the delayed part of it, but more complicated. I will not quote Marshal Tito again. So, yeah, but he also added, but we will find the solution. So, MONTE dialogue, I think it's a good thing. So I really wish that this strategic importance of a European perspective for Western Balkans is shared by the main players. That's. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Viktor Murati from Kosovo Embassy. I would like to relate a bit with the credibility of the enlargement process, and I think that it is very important that the door has been reopened for the region, and I would like to raise another issue that maybe it was not discussed here up to now. We focus more on Macedonia and Albania. Maybe visa liberalization in the face of opening accession negotiations is a small thing, but it is a very important issue for Kosovo, and especially for its citizens, and for keeping this credibility of the region, of the enlargement process alive in Kosovo. Because Kosovo feels that all conditions have been met. And actually we need this to be recognized by EU institutions and also EU member states in our case. And I think that especially the member states should recognize the importance of the process, the enlargement process in the region, the importance of overcoming political problems, the importance in security issues, etc. So basically, Kosovo needs to move freely because, while I said again, it might sound a small issue, but for citizens, in practical terms, is very, very annoying that we're trying to become part of EU. One of the main fundamental values of EU is the freedom of movements, and we are not able to move freely in Europe. And if we feel that we have fulfilled all the conditions, we feel that it is the right time to be able at least to move freely in EU and to keep the hard work and to keep moving in this long journey of becoming part of EU.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
A statement from Her Excellency DZHAMBAZKI.
Well, actually, I'm not.
Well,
Obviously, it's my ambassador. I'm not Jozo, but from the mission of Montenegro. Just to make a few comments on what we heard today. We are satisfied with the increased attention that was that's devoted to the enlargement and which received its boost after the speech of the President of the European Commission about the importance of credible enlargement perspective, and we heard a lot about sequencing of steps that happened in the last months, and I will not get into that, but this refocus on Western Balkans was very well received in countries of the regions. The credible perspective is the key driver of transformation processes, and here I would like to go back to what Clive said, that joining the European Union is a choice, and of course we subscribe to that, but also would like to add that it's not the goal, the final destination. It is a goal, but not a final destination. It's a part of a broader process of democratization. And just also a few comments about the messages that we have received from Sofia summit, while important the political messages, but strong support for the needs, actual needs of the region, who is being historically lagging behind the European Union, and was also very, very welcomed by Montenegro and other countries. As far as Montenegro is concerned, we are facing now the most demanding phases of our European integration, and all of our efforts are directed to that end, with a particular focus on the rule of law area. And here just to turn to the comment of Mr. de Monter, who mentioned the rule of law and what has been done in the past 4.5 years. We opened these chapters in December 2013, and you made this comparison, but just would like to add that in the comparison, what has been done and what's ahead of us if we are thinking about this perspective during 2025, but just would like to say that had it not been the progress made in the rule of law area and in the period from in between two European Commission reports, and we know that the European Commission report is the perfect objective scan of the country, we wouldn't have opened 6 chapters and provisionally closed 1 chapter. So, as I said, we are intensively working on our negotiating commitments, particularly on implementation of legislative and institutional framework for fight against corruption and organized crime, as well as on instigation of further infrastructure development and the act with the notion of having long-term sustainable socioeconomic changes. Of course, in the following period, we will also continue to improve the track record in the chapters 23 and 24 in order to fulfill inter-benchmarks in those chapters and enter the final phase of negotiating process when these chapters are concerned. Also, I'd like to mention that the enhancing the media environment and protection promotion of freedom of media is a priority of the government, as it is one of the key preconditions of the democratic development. There were comments made about the change of management, editorial structures of the national broadcaster, and just to say that the government itself doesn't have constitutional competencies related to the management and editorial structures, but we are working now on new system solutions that will guarantee true independence and the highest professional level of public broadcasting service, but also sustainability of all media and pluralism of media expression. We plan to introduce new improved legal solutions through a broad public consultation process with active participation of all stakeholders, especially management of national broadcaster, and also in support with the most relevant international partners in this area. And our clear position is that, of course, the public broadcaster must be free from any interference, influence with political majority or political minority or any interested groups. And as regards the attack of the journalist that was mentioned, it's the high priority of the security authorities who have been ordered to devote all their available resources in resolving this case and bringing the perpetrators to justice.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm afraid that is all we have time for right now for this event. So I want to say thank you very much everybody for coming. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that it was as positive for all of you as it